Welcome to 20th Century Geek. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen, to 20th Century Geek. I'm Scott Weatherly, your presenter, and we are starting our Superman journey. This is part one of a three-part series looking at the entire history of Superman and celebrating the Man of Steel as he achieves his 80th birthday. For some, that's probably 1 foot in the grave, a little bit closer to death. But not for Soups, not for the big blue Boy Scout. He's still going strong, and if anything, getting stronger each year. So, we're going to do this in three different shows. The first show is me talking with a friend of the show and contributor to Sequart and his own blog, Ben Hall. We talk about comics, we talk about a few other things. That's coming in a few moments. And then next week, I have the comic book guys back. Matt and Jordan come back, and we're talking Superman on the screen. We're going to be talking about the movies, the TV shows, possibly even the cartoons. Everything Superman on the screen. And then finally, the final part 3, is just going to be a question, what does Superman mean to you? And we get some great responses for that. So, without further ado, I'll hand you over to me and Ben and our Superman chat. Welcome, Ben, to 20th Century Geek. Do you want to give the listeners a bit of a sound off on who you are and what you do?
Well, this is kind of complicated. I am a person with Asperger's, which is a form of the autism spectrum.
Mm-hmm.
And I sort of stumbled my way into writing and editing, and I have worked for Sequart, or it's Sequart or Sequart. I always get that wrong.
No. I was speaking to Julian Darius the other weekend. Yeah, and he says it different ways, so it's there is no wrong way of saying it, I don't think.
Yeah. Anyway, I sort of stumbled my way into working for them, doing some editing and then some writing.
Mm-hmm.
You can find my articles on their website. I edited some of Anatomy of Zur-En-Arrh, of the Batman of Zur-En-Arrh.
Oh, really? I've just bought that.
Yeah. I'm one of the editors credited on it. It was a little too tough for me to fully get through the final stages of editing because I was just like, okay, this is feeling a little repetitive.
Yeah. Yes, I can believe that. I think
it's a worthwhile purchase. Yeah,
it is.
People, even though I don't make any money off of saying that.
Yeah. No, it's excellent. I love all the Sequart books. I think they've been fantastic. There's some really good, analysis and really good opinions, some fascinating opinions on different comic subjects. So I have to admit, I highly recommend any of the Sequart books. They're all fantastic.
Yeah, I got started with them after blogging about one of their books. And before that, I had done some work for Salem Press, a small publisher here in the U.S.
Cool. So you are a man well versed in comic lore, then.
Yeah. And I had also basically done my thesis on Marvel movies, and both as an undergraduate and a master's student. Excellent. I did both. So at Webster University.
Yeah.
And lately I've been doing my blog, ripperspot.blogspot.com, and reviewing titles like for Valiant. They send me some stuff. I do honest reviews of their work. And I do some other blog posts, usually opinion pieces. And I've been doing opinion pieces for I can't don't know how to say it. It's like Comic-Con, but with only one C at the end and the on smushed in, so it's like sec word, but it's like one word.
Right. Okay. Yeah. But no, again, I recommend Ripspot. I've read quite a few of your blogs and some of your opinion pieces, and excellent, all good. Really enjoy them.
Thank you. I've also done a comic called Time Trio, so I'm trying my hand at that.
Yeah, good. Yeah, get yourself into the creative side. Fantastic. So,
yeah.
Today then, we are here to talk about the Man of Steel himself, the granddaddy of all superheroes. As you're aware, and as we discussed previously, is the big question I'm asking a lot of people really before we dig into these things is, what does Superman mean to you? And I think it's a really good starting point for this conversation before we do get off into the comics and everything else. So I'm going to throw it to you, Ben. What does Superman mean to you?
Well, this will sound odd without explanation, but he sort of represents an anchor point for my sanity and personal development. And by that I mean because I have Asperger's and ADHD, and eventually we found out depression, Asperger's was not talked about, autism was not talked about for a good long time, and when I was 8 years old, we were still trying to figure out what the diagnosis was, why I was hallucinating on these meds I'd been prescribed because of a misdiagnosis.
Mm-hmm.
And so we decided to put me in a psychiatric hospital.
Wow.
And for that time, even before then, I was into Superman, I was into Batman, you name it.
Mm.
Except for, the Image stuff. I could never get into that back then. But anyway, I was into that, and one of the comics that got me through that month in the psychiatric hospital where I was getting the right diagnosis was Superman Time and Time Again.
Mm.
And that is a collection of these 7 issues from 1991. So obviously, being 8 years old, I was like looking at the covers inside and thinking, "Oh, I've been here longer than I have."
Yes. Yeah.
But anyway, it's it's sort of dated now, but it's obviously because it's a time travel story where they constantly reference 1991. But it's very good at showing how multiple legion of superheroes characters can interact with Superman without, conflicting too much. And it introduced me to Booster Gold, Wave Rider, Lois's early fiancé ship with Superman. So that's where I got the idea of also where it's like, oh, he can be a sort of fatherly figure. He's more grown up than some superheroes.
And that's a really good point. I joked before saying he's the granddaddy of superheroes, but he is, regardless of how old they ever depict him, he really is like a father figure in the DC universe, isn't he? He's sort of that warm fatherly figure, that sort of almost like the moral compass for the whole thing that everyone looks up to for the right answer.
Yeah, and you can even look back to the fact that the Infinite Crisis, for example, where it's like, oh, well, I want the original Earth 2 version comes back, and he says, oh, I want the things like they were in the golden age of superheroes, where things were simple and simplistic and morality and stuff.
Yeah, I mean, that's it. At its core, it's truth and justice. It's, in this day and age, it does sound, it can sound a bit sappy
corny.
and stuff, but
especially
corny.
But the American way, when it should be something like the world way or the best way possible.
Yeah. But it does underline, his ethos of being, regardless of the situation, it may not be the nicest way, but he will always try and find the best way and the fairest way. And I think that's really important. So how did that? You refer to your sort of your Asperger's and the other illnesses. How does Superman help you with that then?
They're more mental conditions, except for the depression, which is an illness.
Yeah. Okay. With those though, as a young boy, then how what impact did Superman have on you then? Did he act as an anchor? Was he as a moralistic?
It was an anchor because it was like I was getting better at reading at the time.
Mm-hmm.
Because it took me longer than my brother, who doesn't have Asperger's. He's not even on the autism spectrum. He does have some stuff going on, but not that. It took me longer to learn to read, and also to speak as clearly as I do now. Even.
Mm-hmm.
So Superman and superheroes were like Spider-Man were big for my childhood. So I grew up collecting mainly those. Superman I'd find in the grocery store, or I even convinced my mom to buy the Death of Reign of Superman trading card set.
Excellent. Yeah.
So it really helped me feel like I was less alone, I guess. And I wasn't just going to be totally an outcast, I guess. Is the best way of looking at it, because even though that wasn't how I thought of back then, I did see myself as an outcast, and Superman he's like the ultimate outcast. He's the immigrant who, can't really be himself half the time, no matter which identity you look at. If you look at Clark Kent, who's his real self, he can't be all Mr. Macho or anything like that. He has to be all slouch posture, different tone of voice, probably a weaker one,
Yeah, I really, and that's something that's really interesting. I think, people, that people talk about characters like the X-Men, as representing that outsider culture, and they do. Don't get me wrong, they definitely do.
Yeah.
But there's definitely something about, especially sort of like the earlier Superman, probably up to the 90s, or maybe should I say the John Byrne era in the 80s, when that is so true. The fact that he is that thing of he can never truly be himself, because when he's Superman, he has to be up front, he's all the shield, he has to be Superman, and then when he's Clark Kent, he has to hide all his powers. So it's interesting that people always talk about who is the. It's like with Batman as well. It's like, who is the real person? But in this case, is it Batman? Is it Superman, or is it Clark Kent?
I'd say it's obviously Clark Kent, and people who are going by, the idea of Superman being the real person are either missing the point of he grew up here on Earth. He is not seeing himself as an alien. He's only seeing himself as an immigrant. And while Bruce Wayne is obviously the mask for Batman, because he went through a traumatic event, and as a child, and he decided, I need to grasp onto something. Yeah. And whether you want to see it as a supernatural thing, like the Dark Knight's Metal thing, or if you want to see it as, okay, this is a traumatized little boy who grew up to some extent that night.
Yeah. It's interesting. I mean, that's the thing. Referring to that, you highlight that dynamic that exists again in the DC universe. That the Batman is the dark. He is a, for want of a better phrase, is a child still dealing with his grief through channeling his rage. While Superman is that beacon of light that shows that sort of, despite being an all-powerful alien, through a moralistic and relatively simple human upbringing, he has become, that moral compass. And you're right. I think that's why the Clark Kent character is so important, to accept that that's who he is, because that's Well, that's who he wasn't. Superman when he was growing up. He was Clark Kent.
No matter how you want to slice it.
Mm.
I mean, it's like he did not really know. He knew he was developing powers. We see that a lot in a lot of versions. But we don't see him going, oh, well, I have to speak like Great Rao or something through a lot of versions, even with whether he was Superboy or just Clark, you know. So, but speaking of his alien heritage, I also think that, as I said in one of my articles, we need to move forward because landing a spaceship, even a crash landing, even if you had the kryptonite meteors, is becoming nearly impossible with how much some people are exploring space.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah. I know what you mean. It's one of those where sort of the origin stories, as I say, as you get further and further away from the original publication of those ideas, like the less and less plausible they remain because of, like you say, because of science and technology that we actually have.
Exactly.
Yeah. There's ways and means, I suppose. A great storyteller can make it work, but you're right. I think it needs to be retooled a little bit.
Well, I think we're sort of past the point of retelling certain superhero origins. I mean, some can still be retold for a number of decades, but we have relaunched. I mean, if you look at like Marvel versus where DC is right now. Yeah, I know.
Yes.
They keep relaunching and retelling and relaunching and retelling, and people are getting a little sick of it.
Oh yeah.
Whereas DC, it's like, oh well, Superman has a son now.
Yeah, and
Batman has a son.
Yeah.
So that while that may age them up, figuratively, we need to also age them up so that it's not ridiculous at some point for them to have a son who's like some age where it's like, but wait, aren't they supposed to be this age?
I agree. I know what you mean, and I definitely agree with the Marvel thing. This whole fresh start thing just feels like stale eggs. It's not. Yeah, that's a different podcast. But I agree. I mean, I
was just using it as an example. That's all.
No, but I totally agree. I definitely agree with that, with what you were saying. But I also like a lot. You know, this whole idea of giving Batman and Superman sons. You know, but Superman more recently with Jonathan Kent. I've really enjoyed it because it's added a dynamic that, you know, we talked about him being the father figure of the DCU, but now he's having to deal with like actual fatherhood, and you know, passing on a legacy, and it's been really interesting, especially in comparison to stories that have been told in the past. So
yeah, like when I think the original Lord Zod was known as Chris Kent or Christopher. During the he didn't last very long. So in the main storyline he was in, I think it was Last Son of Krypton that Richard Donner and Jeff Johns did.
Yes, Last Son of Krypton.
Kurt Busiek actually had time to explore that a little bit. And then I think Greg Rucka finished that off with bringing him back as an adult and having him be either a Nightwing or Flamebird.
Yes, yeah, that was quite a nice arc. That was because that thing of, you know, dealing with with development, especially of powers and of again experience when you've got that those powers and stuff is really important. Yeah, I remember that story. It was good.
Yeah.
So what? No, go on.
Go ahead.
I was going to ask the question. So, what sort of era of Superman sort of stands out to you? What's your go-to sort of era for Superman?
That's tricky because I'm liking what's going on right now from what I've read of it. But I also think we wouldn't have it without the having him die and also the whole wedding issue. And unfortunately, I have to say that I also have to give some props to Convergence, specifically the tie-in for Superman, where he has Jonathan, get born.
Yeah. Yeah, not much came out of Convergence that I was impressed with, but that tidied things up a lot for me.
Convergence just pissed me off so much.
Yeah,
I actually read the main series and Booster Gold, and I was like, wait, you screwed up the lettering on Booster Gold, and you're bringing him and another version of him in to last minute Convergence, and saying that everything I knew about Superman and everybody else, that everything I grew up with, doesn't matter. All the back issues, all that history, you've rewritten with this, and none of it matters. And it made me so mad. I actually traded in several of my issues just because I was like, okay, I'm done with DC for right now.
Yeah, it's that thing, isn't it, of the continuity. Like, they talk about it. Everyone talks about how important it is, but then they'll happily reignite it or restart it at the drop of a hat if they think they're going to sell a couple more issues. And Convergence just felt like a rush job. It really did. It was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But to argue your point, I actually think a lot of people were, especially at DC at the time, were arguing against continuity being a thing that was necessary. And really, no story, even the single issue stories, could work without some kind of continuity. Because you have to have a beginning, middle, and end somewhere along the line.
I find that difficult when people, because I know what you're saying, and that seems to be one of those things that gets bounced around again, is that dropping of continuity. Like, there's too much, it doesn't matter, you haven't got to follow it all. We just want to do this story. And sometimes just doing a story, like you said before, with a self-contained story, it can be great. But there are elements in that, like we said, don't exist without what's gone before. Like you say, the death of Superman, or the Byrne era, or whatever's gone before that. Like those things don't exist without it. So at this point, 80 years in, you can't not have continuity. It's part and parcel. You have to accept it and acknowledge it and just work with it. Yeah.
But if we could go back to the talk about him having a son, I actually heard or read something while doing my article on debunking Larry Nevin for his Man of Steel, Woman of Kleenex essay, where he was supposed to get married to Lois in issue 8 of Action Comics or Superman, one of the two, back in the Golden Age.
Wow.
And it was like the story was never done. It was called The K Medal from Krypton.
Oh, is this the I heard of it. I have heard rumor of this. Is this the lost story that got shelved and was brought out as a bit of a what if in the 50s? Yeah.
You can find it on some unfinished version of it on God, I can't remember the website, but it is definitely a thing that is supposedly going to happen. They just decided, the editors and those in charge of the whole company decided, we can't do this. This will ruin it. So you got shut.
Yeah.
And so I'm theorizing that actually may have led to an earlier Jonathan Kent at some point.
Well, it was
given some other name that would have had to be retrofitted.
Yeah. Well, it always feels a little bit like in the when they introduced Superboy in the mid 50s, it was shoehorned in at best.
Yeah.
Because obviously it was the new concept was that when Clark was younger, he had been a super character. But again,
and nobody in the wider world knew.
Yeah. It was just in Smallville, within that sort of small area. But again, like you say, if just with one slight change, you actually make that like they're doing now, Superman's son, then that whole thing, that whole continuity could have existed, and it did, didn't it? Because it becomes Superboy Prime. Excuse me, it becomes Superboy Prime, which becomes a major part of DC lore, really. But that took some finagling and re-angling of who he was in order for it to work. After they basically, again, it was just a cash grab, really.
Well, I'm not sure I totally get what you mean by Superboy Prime. Do you mean like actual character?
Yeah, my understanding is that
Superboy as a Prime character.
No, so Superboy Prime is in the sort of the character that's literally shattered reality for Infinite Crisis. My understanding, and I think I'm not there, I have to check, is that he actually was from a different world, and those stories that were told in the 50s and the early 60s of Superboy were supposed to be him.
Oh, no. I don't think that's the case. Maybe you're mixing it up with Mark Waid did a Secret Origin story.
Oh, okay.
Which sort of focused on the idea of Superboy Prime being having his own sort of adventures before Crisis on Infinite Earths. But Superboy Prime, it was introduced around, I want to say, a DC Comics Presents issue of that tied into Crisis on Infinite Earths.
Yeah.
And he had only had like one adventure in there before going into Crisis, and then he went nutso in Infinite Crisis, and so on.
And everything went from there. Okay, that's interesting. Because again, that shows then how many versions of this super character there are, and and I do find that period. I'm not one of these people that sort of harkens back to the sort of the golden and the silver age, and sort of from a nostalgia point of view. I find them in many cases almost unreadable.
Oh, definitely. Some of the Silver Age, where it's just Lois is trying to find out his identity, and he's doing the most dickish things to her.
Yeah, like you say, he'll get out of marrying her at the last minute with some ridiculous, twist of the concept. There's a fantastic one which really nails it. He said, in which Superman tells Lois that he will marry her if she can get to a church at a certain time, and she arrives on time, and then he uses his heat vision to weld the door shut so she can't get out, and then says that she didn't get there in time, so he can't marry her. That and when people
I love the one where the first Supergirl comes about through a magic totem that Jimmy Olsen wishes on, and it's like later they introduce her. The real version, or the mainstay version as his cousin, but it's like, you didn't think this out too well, did you?
No, that's it. The Silver Age idea.
Always finds out his identity in that issue, and then he's like giving her a note saying he'll marry her. Superman will marry her.
Yeah. And
she's like, it can't be true, or something.
Yes, the Silver Age was a very interesting. I do find, going through especially when it's the Wortham post Age of the Innocent Wortham sort of crisis, and you see some of the stuff that was created, and it's it is, but they're almost like comics in frustration because they want to do things, and there's some interesting little subverts in there, but you then get things like Superman had a power where he could create a miniature version of himself and shoot it out of his hand, and then he would go off and do like little mini superheroing. It's bizarre.
But we wouldn't have some of the stories we have now that have been reimagined versions of those tales.
Oh, I agree. And then you go talk about continuity, though. Exactly. Like they may not be amazing, and I may not go back and read them, but they have their place in the story of what we have now. When you piece it all together. So you mentioned, we'll talk about actually, because it's an interesting thing you mentioned. Is, from the comics and the Silver Age, and the relationship between Lois and Clark. you mentioned to talk about it, was the TV show of the 90s, The New Adventures of Lois and Clark. So, you grew up, I grew up on it as well, that mid-90s kind of era.
Well, actually, it was early 90s to mid-90s.
Yeah.
It was around 1993 or 94 that it came out in the fall of 93, and it wasn't that popular at first, and then it became popular, and then season 4 came about, and it was like, okay, yeah, you brought in the Kryptonians after you finally have the wedding, blah blah blah. Who cares? And that was partly how I felt. I know a lot of people probably would have just liked them to have done the first marriage in the show as, okay, this is the real deal, and just move on from there. And because you could still have had the dynamic, witty banter, sexual tension between them by just having them constantly get interrupted on, like, their honeymoon, on a date, whatever.
Yeah, it's an interesting show because I've actually watched quite a bit of the first season recently, just whilst I've been researching and prepping for all these shows, and it's actually surprising. I mean, it's dated. It looks very 90s,
Oh yeah.
But it stands up as as entertainment. It's actually quite good, and they managed to sort of maintain that sort of like you say, snappiness between them. It's almost like a 40s era, like
comedy.
Yes, exactly. And it's great, and that sort of ages really well. And the chemistry between Dean Cain and Terry Hatcher is really good. And I do think they squandered it later on, which is unfortunate.
Yeah.
But yeah, no, those first couple of seasons were really good.
And apparently they were going to have a kid if they had gone for a 5th season.
Oh, really? I see that.
Because they end the 4th season with the baby crib, and it's supposedly was going to be a Kryptonian royalty baby that they were taking care of. So they would have had a kid. So that might have introduced kids sooner to the comics.
It seems like they've always been pulling on that string, always been teasing it. It's an interesting place to go, really. I mean, introducing kids definitely changes the dynamic. But yeah, no, that show, the things I find interesting about that show, let's say, is the relationship between Lois and Clark.
And how much he almost gives away his identity all the time.
Yeah, he's a little bit, like I say, there's a couple of episodes where he's a little bit slap happy about how he hides his identity. Yeah.
Oh, like season 1 has, there's this episode called Fly Hard.
Yes.
Which is obviously Die Hard.
Yes.
Where he's trapped in the Daily Planet with Perry, Jimmy, the Michael Landis version of Jimmy, which I hated that they recast him. But Lois, Lex, and this kid named Jack. And keeps referencing, I've done the calculations, I've thought it all through, if I could do this. And it's like, you're supposed to be Clark Kent now. You're not Superman in costume. They don't know you have powers. You are giving the whole ball away.
Yes, yeah. Yeah. And that's, it's quite endearing in many respects, for doing that, because they try to do these things in it, and...
Oh, it's very endearing that they tried to do it. And I was actually amazed that they had, at the time, he was a Star Trek mainstay for Next Generation, and his wife, Jeannie Francis. Jonathan Frakes, I believe, is... he played Captain Riker.
Yes, yeah. Big fan of TNG, yeah.
Yeah, they appeared as a crazy villainous couple in season 3 or 4.
Really?
Yeah.
Excellent. So that's the thing. It was that era when it was that period in the early 90s. I almost feel, and someone suggested this to me then, and I agree actually. And I feel it's a good point. Is that Lois and Clark was almost like a counter to the X-Files. It was that lighter version. in a similar, it was. You have, the darker, the sort of the paranormal investigation of the X-Files. Then you have this lighter duo dealing in little things. It was in an interesting way. I kind of like the idea of that.
I could see that, but I honestly I have watched very little of the X-Files.
Oh my word!
I know, blasphemy.
It
but,
is.
It was always more my mom's thing at the time, and I was still a kid at the time it was out. So it's like, from what I hear, Mulder masturbated a lot, and at the time I was still entering that phase. So.
Yes, it had it. Yeah, there was some. I'd say what do they call it? Close to the knuckle kind of jokes around that. Back in the 90s. But yeah, I mean, what was when you look back at sort of I'm going to go on to screen versions on a different show, but I always felt sorry for Dean Cain taking on the Shield, like especially when you're following not too long after Christopher Reeve, and trying to break that mold a little bit. And I do think Dean Cain did a really good job to be.
He did a perfect job for someone who had to follow on the heels of Christopher Reeve. But let's face it, he wasn't the first one to follow in the red boots.
Oh, no. I mean, there'd been plenty, but, yeah.
Well, I was actually talking about the Superboy TV show.
Of course, yes. I've only seen 2 episodes of that.
Nobody remembers it, but it's like, they were the first ones to really have Mr. Mixel Spitlick on in the live action anyway. I mean, you had the Filmation cartoons for the first, but that was like 1 or 2 times.
Yeah. See, I've only seen a couple of episodes. I really do need to watch some more of that. Because again, it's really fallen under the radar, hasn't it? That one. That
I think that has to do sort of with the rights issues. Having been tested over and over again, it just became like, who owns the rights? What can they distribute? All that.
Yeah, because I had to find a couple of episodes online because I couldn't really find it on Blu-ray or DVD over here in the UK. So I had to find a couple of episodes on online somewhere. I'll definitely pick up some more of that.
Do you use iPlayer?
I do, yes. Oh, is it on there?
It might be on there. I don't know.
I shall have a look because it's worth. I think it is worth.
Because it's on iTunes here, so who knows?
I'll definitely give it a go. You would just go back to another character. Sort of, you were talking about that the different versions of Superman and things, and I'm not going to say give me your top 5 because I think that sort of puts people on the spot. But there's a couple of stories really for me that always stand out, and everyone always says, when you talk about Batman, you go, oh, what's Batman's best stories? People can roll off, a whole reel of things, Dark Knight Returns, Hush, or Long Halloween, Court of Owls, all these stories that have been created. It seems a little harder with Superman, but there are stories.
Want to do top 5 or top 10? I can do that.
Let's do a top 5 then, if you want to do a top 5, because they're interesting to sort of see, because I think it varies so much more for people with Superman stories than it does within the characters. So what are your top 5 then? What are the ones you go to?
Well, first, obviously, is Superman Time and Time Again.
Mm-hmm.
Because of the personal attachment.
Yes.
But then I'd have to go with It's a Bird, which is actually a Vertigo book about trying to craft a Superman story.
Oh.
It's by Stephen T. Siegel and Teddy Christensen, and it's sort of autobiographical at the same time. About Stephen's battle with, who I don't know, so I'm just calling him by his first name. So, but his family had Huntington's disease.
Okay.
And so he was having trouble because he had also an attachment from the comics when learning about the disease as a kid. But it was like a dark family secret, so he was coming to grips with that at the same time as trying to craft this story. So he gets different opinions from different people throughout the story that he puts in.
Ah.
And so he gives his own version of Nietzsche and stuff. And then I'd have to go with its counterpart, All-Star Superman. For the more brighter, more iconic take on Superman.
Yes, I love All-Star Superman.
And then I'd have to go with the first time, I can't remember the specific issue, but it can be found in the Superman volume, where Superman and Batman first introduce their sons to each other.
Oh, in the New 52?
It was sort of like before they did Superman Reborn.
Yes, I remember it. Yes.
And I'd have to say that the next one is the 2 issues of Action Comics, and I believe it was either Superman or Superman Man of Steel, where Clark reveals his identity to Lois.
Yes, Man of Steel. It's yes.
After they've just gotten engaged.
Yes, I remember that. Yes, it is. It's,
And the Action Comic, I just love the cover where she's like has the glasses in her hand, or he's holding the glasses, and she's like looking so shocked. Like, how did I not see this?
Yes. Yeah.
And then I'd have to go with probably, well, I know this isn't a comic per se, but it is a good example. The first Christopher Reeve Superman movie.
Oh, that film is amazing. Yeah, that.
Mainly because Richard Donner just did such a wonderful job of crafting so much of it with the help of his crew, and also because there's this one moment where Christopher Reeve just takes off the glasses while Clark Kent. He's in Lois's apartment, and she's just gone into her room to get dressed after meeting Superman, and he's like grinning to himself, and then he's like realizing, I better put these back on before she gets back out here.
Yes.
And you see the change from Clark to Supes to Clark.
Yes, I think it's beautiful. It's such a good moment. Like I say, it's sort of he gains a couple of inches. His shoulders straighten, and he sort of straightens up, and he becomes Superman in a suit.
That's how he does it.
Yeah. And I mean, when you talk about All-Star Superman, Frank Quitely's art depicts that so well that he shows.
He wears oversized clothes. He just
he sort of like he hunches over, and like I say, he wears the thing. He looks like a I won't say scruffy, but like you say, a sort of out of place farm boy in a city, and then
I'd say the out of place farm boy in the city would be more Superman for all seasons.
Yes,
but
another great one.
In this case, I'd say he's looks more like some kind of brutish ape man who can't dress himself and has to wear specs.
There are a couple of panels like that, yeah. But it's again, it's that thing, isn't it? They make it so simple that as Clark, it's not that he doesn't look like Superman, but he gives off such an aura that no one ever suspects that this person could ever be, the Man of Steel. No, good choices. I like it. I like the fact that they say it's when it comes down to sort of specific issues that sort of that stand out for you, and they can be really important, or they can tell something major about the character. I mean, a couple for me is, let's say, All-Star Superman. I think is amazing. I think
I will say there is one of the Christopher Reeves movies that I absolutely hate. and it's not the one you're probably thinking of. It's not
Oh.
4. It is number 3.
You mean the Richard Pryor vehicle?
Yeah. Yeah, because I always think of it as Richard Pryor 3. Not because he's in it more than Christopher Reeve.
Yeah, he had a much bigger payday as well. So it's definitely a Richard Pryor star vehicle rather than a Superman film. Yeah. Yeah, I know what you mean. That one. It's a bit. It feels a little bit out of place. Superman 1 and 2, either version of 2, stand up and they feel cohesive and beyond that they feel like cash cows. They cashed in a little bit. So yeah, it's the films are of varying degrees of quality. But yeah, I mean, for me, I think I've gone back and there are certain. Recently, there was an issue in the current run. It may have even been like it was 38 or 39. So in the last couple of months, there was an amazing issue that was encapsulated in a single issue. It was just Superman with these sort of ill children, doing like
I think that was I want to say 40 or 41.
Yeah, it was very recent, and you say they're upstairs in my long box at the moment. But
I think I have it here somewhere.
It was.
It was 39.
39. There you go. So yeah, it was, and it was just such a, after all the sort of the things the grim and gritty that sort of DC sometimes does fall into, to have this wonderfully compassionate issue from Pat Gleason and
Peter J. Tomasi.
Yeah, PJ Tomasi. It was just wonderful. It was such a wonderful issue. So hats off to them for it. But that is the kind of thing I like. That Superman, you get great epics that I've really enjoyed. I think Last Son is a great story. Brainiac is another one. I think that's fantastic. And ones like that, but then you get a single issue that just stands out as being absolutely fantastic. He can be an amazing character in that way, that just the smallest details can really sort of shine
and uplift people.
Exactly, yeah, and that's it. It was totally uplifting, and he can be, and that's in this world. I think that when it can get dark and it's not always the nicest place. Despite being fictional, I think Superman is incredibly relevant today as a, to show us that there can be better ways of doing things.
That there's a light in the darkness.
Exactly. Yeah. So when written well, I think he can be brilliant. I always get a bit bored of sort of broody whenever they do a broody Superman, or it gets tiresome quite quickly, I think. Right.
That was my problem with Man of Steel and the whole Zack Snyder version, which I think they were course correcting very well to some extent, with having a more smiling, optimistic Superman in Justice League.
Yes.
Which, while not the greatest film of all time by far, it is serviceable enough for my taste.
It was fun. It did. It felt. In parts, there were flashes of brilliance in it, I think, and like I say, there was a real course correct, which I quite enjoyed, especially in the Superman character. So yeah, I'm interested to see what comes next.
If anything.
Yes, I was just thinking that, if anything. But yeah, no, and that's the thing. I think Superman has changed over time, and I think. How does he represent society is always interesting as well, in both books and on film.
Well, there was an interesting issue or moment from an issue recently during the. Well, I don't want to spoil it, but
that's okay. No, we'll send it out. Spoilers for the next couple of minutes.
With the reveal of Mr. Oz as Jor-El,
yes.
Storyline, they have him fight a guy who was trying to kill some immigrants, or some people he thought of as immigrants, because he got fired from a factory. And Superman is like, no, this isn't going to happen. This isn't what I represent.
Yeah.
And melts his gun, obviously.
Yes, yeah. But that harkens back to like his, like, almost like the first couple of stories of Superman. Like, he before he could fly, before there was kryptonite, before everything else.
Yeah, he beats up a wife beater in his first story.
Exactly. Yeah. And then, in another one, he saves people from a building that's being condemned and stuff like that. So he was a Robin Hood almost character with extended powers.
Well, let's not dally around it. He was a social justice warrior, basically.
Yeah, I wasn't going to say it, but yeah, no, you're right. You're totally right. He was.
I'm sorry, but I'm just sick of people using that as a bad term. It's like, if you're fighting for social justice or justice of any kind for the majority of people, you shouldn't be,
No, I agree, and that's where I think it's interesting that he is. I mean, that's where he came from. He comes from he's a social justice warrior for the people. He's a representative of the people. And that's what, even as the as you said before, the ultimate outsider, the ultimate outcast. That good upbringing means that he will still stand up for what he thinks is right, regardless of who it is, that he's protecting. But this is it. I mean, he can be twisted for other things. Like, going back to like Dark Knight, the Dark Knight Returns, and you get the sort of Frank Miller version, which is the big sort of they use him as the big blue Boy Scout as a tool of the government, and it's clear even then that Miller's conservative views are clouding the use of
the care.
Yeah, exactly. And it never felt, although I love that book as a Batman book, it always felt a little bit wrong for Superman. That kind of Superman, I never felt he would become just a tool for Reagan.
For the government that doesn't question anything, goes to war for them, and burns off Green Arrow's arm.
Yeah, that always felt a little bit off to me when you sort of really know the character. And I think I prefer that version, like you say, the social justice warrior, that it actually does stand up for the little guy. Knowing that he both can and should. Yeah.
I don't really have anything to add to that part, but
no. It's
just you put it so eloquently.
It's a good discussion. That's why I like going on these discussions with people, because it takes you places and you ignites new thoughts. What do you think as a last thing then? Before we try and wrap this up, what do you think comes next for Superman, or what would you like to see come next for Superman?
Well, unfortunately, I think we're getting Brian Michael Bendis, who's better at street level than any superpowered level.
Yes, I agree.
And so I'm hoping that we at least keep Jonathan as a mainstay. I hope that the marriage survives the next several years.
Yeah. And
you get retconned out again. And I hope that DC finally sees sense and not only does a good movie, but tries to go, okay, well, since comic sales are not what they were, let's do something crazy and just slowly age up the character. And see what happens. And they can always bring him back to Clark at, being a certain age through the multiple Earths.
Yeah. I've always liked those ideas. The Earth, well, I say the original Golden Earth 2, so it'd be the Earth 2 Superman, that slightly sort of older statesman, graying at the temples kind of version of Superman. I really enjoy that version. I think and I do think it's got a place. I'd love to see that version played out. Even if I'd like to see it brought back, even if it's like just a one-off story, a what if or they just
bring back with a new retrofit Earth 2.
Hmm.
You know, where it's like, oh, well, it sort of has some of the characteristics of the New 52 Earth 2, but it also has what we knew from post-crisis, you know.
Yeah, there's definite opportunities there. I agree with what you're saying about Bendis. I'm probably going to give... he's got like a 6-issue introductory sort of arc.
Well, isn't that just one issue for him? I'm sorry to say.
Yeah, you're very right. I'm not sure how much information we're going to get in 6 issues. But we will see what it's like.
But we will at least see a direction from it.
Yeah, I'm interested to see what he's going to bring. But as you say, I'm not overly keen. My experience of Bendis goes back to his the thing he stung me with his version of Moon Knight, and I haven't forgiven him since. So, yeah.
I've always been saddened that by the fact that he kept doing 6 months later during his New Avengers and Avengers run, and it's like, wait, but you still have the sliding time scale. Is no one editing this?
Yeah. I think when he was at Marvel, he was one of those guys that sort of like, he had very, he had a lot of sway over what he was getting away with, and I don't think...
And to be fair to him, he can write very well for street level.
Mm-hmm.
But I think the higher powered a character is, or the more out there the character is, he has a little more trouble. Especially when not dead.
Yeah, no, I agree. It will be interesting to see where it goes. I've loved the Reborn run. What Tomasi and Gleason have done, I think, has been fantastic. Their version of Jonathan Kent, Superman's son, has been great. I think. I don't know if you've been reading. I haven't read all of them. I've read bits and pieces of Super Sons.
Oh yeah, I've been reading some of Super Sons, definitely.
And that's been really good fun. Yeah. So I do so hope they keep Jonathan around. I think he's a great character.
Yeah, and I think he's a good counterpoint to Damian.
Yes. Well, it does. It like we said before, like the light and the dark, and to have it almost represented in teen form is wonderful. Yeah. Is wonderful to see played out. So yeah, let's see how it.
Especially because I think Bruce is more relaxed than Clark is regarding fatherhood.
Yeah, yeah.
It's just
no.
Because you don't see him constantly monitoring Damian.
No.
Or the situation with Damian, given his upbringing so far.
Yeah.
But it's like, okay, Bruce has had more children to deal with, so he's sort of become more relaxed, possibly because of that. While Clark is like, I have to be constantly protective of my son.
Yes, it's a good point actually from a fathering perspective of their approach. Bruce is definitely a little more hands off, I think, as you say, which is interesting considering I wouldn't want to be around Damian with sharp objects.
I wouldn't want to be around him if he thought ill of me.
Yeah, I was just saying. Yeah, he wouldn't hold back on his on what he thinks of you.
Well, I'm more worried about what he try and do to me. Because I consider myself pretty dangerous in a fight, but he has more skills than I do.
Oh, yeah. Anyone who was born and raised by the League of Assassins is definitely going to have an advantage, I think.
Yeah.
And on that note, I think we'll start looking at wrapping up. It's been a great conversation. I think we've covered a lot of what Superman means and what he's done and what what could come in the future. Ben, it's been fantastic. Thank you very much for appearing on the podcast.
You're very welcome, and thank you for having me.
No, at all. One last time, anything else you want to put a quick plug in before we wrap up?
Time Trio, the comic I've been starting up, or a comic series I've been starting up, it has the first issue already on Comixology.
Mm-hmm.
And the second one is just waiting for a release date.
Fantastic. Okay, people, you've heard that. Check out Comixology. Okay, guys, there we have it. Fantastic conversation. It was great to have Ben on the show, and might have him back in the future. He's got some good points and some good thoughts on things. So, hope you enjoyed it. There's so much more Superman we are going to be covering in the next couple of weeks. And if you've got thoughts on Superman, or anything really in the 20th century, or the 20th century geek sphere, let me know. Get in contact. Email me at 20thcenturygeek@gmail.com. Find me on Twitter at 20th Century Geek. And don't forget the website, www.20thcenturygeek.com. We're on Facebook, we're on Tumblr, we're on Instagram. Particularly check out Instagram, got some good photos on there. And all month I'm going to be doing a Superman pick a day. So, thank you so much. Big final thing though, before we move on to the last thing. Don't forget, we are on Patreon. Any donations are welcome. In fact, any donations are treasured. They'd be fantastic. Thank you very much to anyone who does donate. Okay, moving on to next week, we'll be covering off Superman on the big screen. So, look forward to that. Matt and Jordan coming back. Until then, I'll see you soon.